Okay, I'm with Dr. Paul Cappon, President and CEO of the Canadian Council on Learning. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
And perhaps we could focus on the CCL's main messages for the future of learning. So the first question I'd like to ask, and it's kind of embedded in your report, what is broken in Canada in terms of education and learning?
Well, let me just say that what isn't broken is educators themselves. I think we have a strong cadre of educators at all levels, but we're swimming against the structural tides. So what is broken is that we don't have 21st century structures and mechanisms for the 21st century to succeed. By that, I mean we don't have the proper relationships between governments, dysfunctional relationships between federal and provincial governments in particular, but also between the private and the public sector prevent us from moving ahead. In fact, so we as we look to the conditions for the future, we say that Canada is sliding down the international learning curve, not because of our educators, but because of our structures being so antiquated.
Okay, that leads me nicely into the next question. We know that CCL is closing down, so how do we continue a national debate given the dynamics of Canada, its systems, and its politics?
Yes, in the absence of CCL, it becomes more difficult because our job, of course, was to report to Canadians transparently on how well we were doing and what works and what doesn't work. A lot of research on education and learning, so we'll be missing an important Canadian institution as we close in March of next year. It means that the burden has to be taken up by other social partners, other organizations in civil society, like universities, community colleges, and other colleagues, by industry in particular, Aboriginal organizations across the whole landscape of civil society. But also, we have to give ourselves intergovernmental structures that work, which we don't have now. Apart from the fact that we're the only country in the world with no national ministry of education, the only country, that wouldn't be so bad if we really worked together collaboratively on a voluntary basis, but we don't. So we have to have those crucial mechanisms at intergovernmental level.
And how optimistic or pessimistic are you that these networks and intercooperations will take place?
Governments will cooperate if citizens demand it. It's entirely up to the Canadian public to demand it. All of the organizations involved in learning, including municipalities and employers and unions, NGOs of all kinds, should have a kind of a charter in which they demand that these mechanisms, which we've described in our report, our legacy report, be put into effect. People need to demand that the ministers of education in British Columbia take responsibility for Canada, not just for British Columbia, that we construct a national framework. Without that, we'll continue to fall behind.
And how engaged do you think Canadians are in terms of educational issues compared to other jurisdictions?
Well, most Canadians are blissfully unaware of a number of things, and this troubles me a great deal. They don't know how education works in Canada. They actually think the national government has a role in education. And they don't make demands, therefore, of their provincial ministers on a national basis. And Canadians are fairly complacent, I would say, about education. Most Canadian parents think their children's schools are pretty good. And they also have, unfortunately, the comparison with the United States. They pay attention to the United States, which has low averages in almost everything. They can afford that because they have so many elite institutions. What we don't become aware of is how fast European countries and OECD countries in general are moving and how non-competitive we are. So it's going to be up to Canadians to develop a far more heightened consciousness of the growing gap between us and other countries in so many phases of learning.
Okay, one last question. Could you speculate on the learning landscape in Canada 10 years from now?
Well, that's very interesting. In 10 years, there will be more post-secondary institutions. There'll be more students in a province like British Columbia, which will require 72% of people having post-secondary education as opposed to 66% now to get jobs in the knowledge economy. The demand will be strong, and if there is a sort of a national vision, a national focus, and a set of national goals, people will be taking responsibility, will improve from early childhood right through schools, universities, community colleges, and into the workplace. That's what I hope. That's what I speculate when I'm in an optimistic mood will happen, and Canada will progress. Otherwise, if we don't do this on a national basis, we don't give ourselves a national framework, we will be laggards, and other societies will eat our lunch.
On that note, thank you.
Thank you.